Elena Matthews boarded Flight 4827, just like any other traveler, quietly and without fuss. She moved with the calm precision of someone who had been through hundreds of airports, but didn't care much for small talk or aisle gossip. She had no flashy luggage, just a small black backpack and a Kindle tucked under her arm. She didn't wear makeup, had her brown hair tied in a loose bun, and wore a faded gray hoodie that could have belonged to anyone. In a crowd, she was invisible. That's exactly how she liked it. She gave the flight attendant a courteous nod, checked her boarding pass row 9, window seat, and slid past a young couple, already arguing over who'd get the armrest. Once seated, she buckled her belt, glanced at the emergency card like she actually cared, and took a long, slow breath as the rest of the plane buzzed with the usual travel noise. Zippers, coughs, toddlers crying, and the synthetic voice of pre-boarding. Announcements. The man sitting next to her, a balding businessman in a cheap suit, tried making eye contact. Elena smiled faintly, but quickly put in her earbuds and turned to look out the window, watching the ground crew shuffle around with tired expressions. The sky was unusually clear for a Denver morning, and yet something unsettled her. She wasn't sure what, just a feeling in her chest. Not fear, more like pressure. A memory, maybe. A warning. She tried to brush it off. It had been years since she let her thoughts go there, that the engines roared to life and the plane began taxiing. Flight attendants moved down the aisle, checking seatbelts. A child a few rows ahead shrieked in protest, earning a few sympathetic smiles and some glares. The aircraft finally lifted into the sky, climbing smoothly, slicing through clouds that looked like harmless cotton. Elena leaned her head back and closed her eyes. She hadn't flown in months, at least not commercially. Trains, buses, rental cars, always moving. It was easier that way. Cleaner, safer. Not in terms of danger, but in terms of being found. Row 9. She had asked for it specifically. Not too close to the front where she might attract attention. Not too far back where she'd be trapped. Strategically perfect in every way. Old habits died hard about an hour into the flight. The seatbelt sign turned off, and the beverage cart rolled down the aisle. "Would you like anything to drink, ma'am?" The attendant asked with a bright, automatic smile. "Water, please." Elena replied as she reached for the plastic cup. Her fingers trembled slightly. Again, she felt it, that strange tension. Her eyes shifted toward the cockpit door. It was shut tight as always. Nothing unusual. And yet, something deep in her gut screamed otherwise. She didn't know it yet, but Flight 4827 had already started to drift off its designated course by a fraction so small it wouldn't be noticed by passengers or even by the flight attendants. But up front, in the cockpit, Captain Reed had just noticed something odd. His navigation system was no longer responding normally. A gentle override request had flashed on the backup panel, only for a second, then vanished. He didn't speak a word yet. He stared at the screen, tried a reset. "No change? Any issues?" The co-pilot asked, sipping coffee. "Probably nothing," Reed muttered, though his eyes remained fixed. His instincts, just like Elena's, had started to stir. In row 9, Elena reached down into her backpack and pulled out a small leather wallet. Hidden inside wasn't money or ID, it was a worn, creased photograph. A picture of her, younger, standing next to a fighter jet with the words Falcon 2 stenciled on the nose. Her hair had been longer then, her eyes fiercer. That version of her no longer existed, or so she believed. She slipped the photo back in and stared out the window. The clouds looked calm. The plane flew steady, but deep inside her bones, she knew something was coming. And for the first time in 15 years, she wasn't just Elena Matthews, the ordinary woman in row 9. She was Falcon 2, and the sky was calling. Her back, the seatbelt sign chimed on with a sudden ding that startled even the flight attendants. The plane shuddered not violently, but just enough to make passengers glance at one another. Elena looked up from her Kindle, alert. Outside her window, clouds began to swirl in unnatural patterns. There wasn't a storm on the forecast. The pilot had said the skies were clear all the way to New York. Then came the second jolt. It wasn't ordinary turbulence. It felt rhythmic, sharp, calculated. Not weather. The man next to her looked uneasy. "Hope this isn't one of those flights," he muttered, forcing a nervous chuckle. Elena didn't reply. Her hand gripped the armrest. In the cockpit, Captain Reid frowned. His fingers tapped rapidly against the glass screen. The aircraft's navigation system had flickered again. Then it froze, just for a second. He tapped the screen. Still frozen. The map showed them drifting ever so slightly south of their original route. Barely enough to sound an alarm, but it was wrong. Very wrong. "Reboot the GPS relay," Reid said to his co-pilot, who was mid-sip of coffee. "On it," the co-pilot replied. Setting down the cup, they both watched as the system tried to refresh. Nothing. Still frozen. Suddenly, on the secondary display, a symbol appeared, a dot, followed by a pulsing triangle. Then it vanished. Captain Reid's jaw tightened. That wasn't a commercial flight signal. It was military encryption. And only someone trained in covert aerial defense would even recognize it. Back in row 9, Elena's eyes locked onto the overhead display. Showed their cruising altitude 35,000 feet. But the numbers glitched for half a second. 34,925. Then 35,005. Then back to normal. Most passengers wouldn't even notice. She did. She had seen systems like this fail before, but only in war zones. Places where enemy drones, scrambled electronics, or cyber attacks attempted to reroute friendlies into hostile zones. Elena sat up straighter. The plane shook again, more violently this time. A child began crying in row 6. Luggage compartments rattled. A water bottle rolled down the aisle. The fastened seatbelt sign glowed red. Flight attendants rushed to calm people down, forcing smiles they didn't believe. Elena kept her eyes on the cockpit door. Then came the moment that broke the normal. A voice crackled through the internal audio, barely audible, and definitely not meant for the public address system. Just a few garbled words. Fall -2. Status. Copy? Elena's heart stopped. The voice was distorted, masked behind noise, but unmistakable. It wasn't a call for the crew. It was a call for her. She froze in her seat, the cabin noise around her turning into a dull hum. Her breathing slowed. Her fingertips ting lead. No one else reacted. No one understood it. But to her, it was as loud and clear as a gunshot. Falcon 2. Her call sign. A name buried so deeply in classified records that even she had tried to forget it. She leaned forward, eyes scanning the cabin. No agents, no uniforms. Just scared passengers. And clueless attendants. But that voice, it was Captain Reid. He was the only one who had ever called her that during flight ops. The last time she'd heard it, smoke was filling her cockpit and alarms were screaming in her ears. She reached under her seat, pulling out her bag. Calm, efficient. She slid out a sleek black case from the side pocket, just 3 inches long, military issued. Emergency comms receiver. Technically illegal to have on a commercial flight. But she wasn't just any passenger. Not anymore. She stood up. The man next to her blinked. You okay? Excuse me, Elena said, already stepping over his legs. She moved down the aisle with quiet determination. The turbulence hadn't stopped, and the plane shuddered again. A drink cart slammed into a row of seats. Passengers gasped. One of The flight attendant stepped into her path. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. We need everyone." Elena raised her voice slightly, firm and clear. "I need to speak to the captain. He requested me." The attendant blinked, unsure whether to challenge her. Then Captain Reed's voice came over the system again. But this time it was clear. "All crew, clear row 9 passenger to the cockpit." Immediate authorization. Gasps followed. Heads turned. The woman who had sat so quietly, lost in a book just moments ago, was now walking calmly toward the front of the plane, past panicked whispers and confused eyes. And as she moved through the cabin, something inside her shifted back into place. Falcon 2 was airborne again. Elena stepped into the narrow corridor just behind the cockpit, her senses sharper than they had been in years. The hum of the engines, the flickering of overhead lights, even the distant sound of passengers whispering behind her, everything seemed to slow down. The flight attendant who had tried to stop her earlier stood aside now, watching her like someone seeing a ghost walk by. Elena gave a small nod and pressed the comm panel near the cockpit door. It buzzed. Inside, Captain Reed responded instantly. "Voice ID confirmed." "Open." The panel read dot with a click. The heavy door swung inward. The cockpit was chaos. Warning. Lights blinked in red and amber across the instrument panels. The co-pilot slumped in his seat, unconscious, a deep bruise blooming on the side of his temple. The oxygen mask had dropped, hanging loosely from the ceiling. Captain Reed sat at the helm, pale and sweating, one hand on the yoke, the other navigating. Controls he didn't trust anymore. His eyes snapped to Elena as she stepped inside. And for a second, the past washed over both of them. "Elena," he said, relief and tension braided in his voice. "Didn't think I'd have to call you back. Like this." She looked at the blinking lights, then back to him. "You used the call sign. I wouldn't have unless it was bad." She moved toward the console, immediately taking in the key warnings. Auto navigation failure. Altitude drift. Digital override in progress. External frequency breach. Her fingers danced over the secondary panel, running diagnostics she hadn't touched in 15 years. "What happened to him?" she asked, nodding toward the co-pilot. "Felt dizzy. Collapsed mid-climb. No known medical issues." "I think they targeted him." "They?" Elena asked sharply. Reed gave a grim smile. "Whoever's hijacking us, we've been losing control in slow intervals. Not full autopilot shutdown. It's smarter. They're rerouting us quietly. If I hadn't caught it early. She interrupted. "How long do we have?" 17 minutes until we're out of FFA-controlled airspace and into a restricted flight zone near Allegheny. If we cross that line, without clearance, F-18s will scramble." Elena swallowed hard. "They won't ask questions. They'll just engage." "Exactly." She stared at the monitors, piecing it together. This wasn't a random hack or tech failure. This was coordinated, subtle, weaponized, and somehow they had known she would be on board. A chill crawled across her spine. Captain Reed was still watching her. "I shouldn't have let you disappear," he said quietly. "You were too damn good to walk away. You didn't stop me. You didn't give me a chance," he replied. For a moment, their eyes locked. Two veterans of skies and war zones, sharing 1,000 unspoken memories in one glance. Elena turned back to the co-pilot station and dropped into the chair. Her fingers flew across the controls. "You remember the bypass protocol, Kilo 14? She asked. "I remember writing it with you," Reed said. She typed rapidly, navigating through layers of encrypted systems that weren't supposed to be touched on commercial flights. Her old credentials still worked. Somewhere in a department of defense server, her call sign Falcon 2 remained dormant, Not alive. Lines of code scrolled. A bypass initiated. For a few seconds, the screens flashed white dot, then green. Manual control restored. GPS rerouted. Cabin life support stabilized. Captain Reed let out a slow breath. You did it. Elena wasn't smiling. I slowed it down. We haven't won yet. They'll try again. Who is they? I have a guess. But it's not going to matter if we don't land this plane. Suddenly, the comm panel crackled again. This time, it wasn't encrypted. It was open. Flight 4827. This is Northeastern Defense. You are breaching restricted airspace. Divert immediately or prepare for military response. You have 60 seconds to comply. Elena looked at the clock. They were already inside the danger zone. Reed sat back, eyes on her. I can't turn us in time. Elena gripped the controls. But I can. Falcon 2? She looked at him. Her voice was calm and absolute. Control. And just like that, she was no longer the woman in row 9. She was the pilot now. And she was going to save everyone on board, or die trying. As Elena took the yoke, her hands settled with surprising steadiness. It was as if muscle memory had waited patiently all these years for its return. She was no longer Elena Matthews, quiet traveler with a book in row 9. She was Falcon 2, elite test pilot, military trained, decorated, and erased. She guided the aircraft gently, easing them out of the path of restricted airspace. In the corner of her vision, the terrain map began to stabilize. Altitude held. Threat level dropped, but it wouldn't last. Whoever had hijacked the system would try again, and they would escalate. Behind the calm, her mind drifted to the moment everything changed 15 years ago. Back then, she was the youngest female test pilot in her Air Force division. Respected. Relentless. Fast. They gave her high-risk assignments because she didn't just follow protocol, she anticipated it. She didn't wait for orders. She read the sky and she commanded it. Her final mission had been buried in black ink and sealed records. Only 5 people knew what happened that day. Captain Reed was one of them. They'd been flying a prototype. Aircraft part drone, part fighter, experimental tech years ahead of its time. It was meant to be a breakthrough in stealth and AI-assisted combat navigation. But something went wrong. The system malfunctioned mid-test, and the jet became a ghost visible on no radar, unresponsive to control. Elena had to make a choice. Eject and let the billion-dollar project vanish into enemy-controlled mountains. Or override the AI manually, risking everything to bring it down intact. She stayed. The crash was brutal. Her co-pilot didn't survive. Elena had dragged herself from the wreckage with fractured ribs and blood in her eyes, guiding a rescue beacon by hand. For 72 hours, she fought hypothermia and silence, until a patrol found her. After that, she was offered medals and reassignment. She refused both. Instead, she disappeared. She knew too much. She had lost too much. And she no longer trusted the machine she once loved. But even the best ghosts can be found when needed. Elena, Reed said, snapping her back to the present. They're trying again. She looked at the panel. Another override signal blinked, trying to take back control. This time, it was smarter, slower. A gradual drip of commands, almost undetectable. They're learning, she muttered. Reed nodded grimly. They want to force a failure. Engine loss, oxygen cut, something we'll blame on mechanical fault. And once that happens, Elena added, they'll let us crash and call it tragic pilot error. She opened her black case again and pulled out a tiny USB drive with a red strip down the side. It wasn't ordinary. It held a kill code, digital key designed to shut down rogue navigation AI systems. She had kept it for years, tucked away like a bad memory. No, it was their best chance. She plugged it into the co-pilot console. The screen flashed. Recognized. F2 protocol engaged. Within seconds, the override attempt stalled. Lines of code were blocked and isolated. Control shifted fully back to the cockpit. The system's tampering had been neutralized. For now, Reed looked at her, eyes wide with disbelief. You kept that all this time? I never throw away tools that save lives. In the cabin behind them, passengers remained unaware of just how close they had come to death. Some were still clutching armrests, others whispering about turbulence. No one knew a cyber-attic had nearly turned their flight into a missile. Elena leaned back for a moment, letting herself breathe. But only for a moment, because she still didn't know why she had been targeted. She wasn't naive. This wasn't a random event. She checked the passenger manifest. Reed had pulled up earlier. One name stood out. Gregory Salin, a defense contractor whistleblower she hadn't seen in over a decade. He was seated in row 21, under a fake name. Flagged by a private security firm, but cleared by TSA. Elena's stomach dropped. He's on this flight, she said. Reed followed her gaze. You think they're trying to stop him? No, she said. They're trying to silence him and frame me. It all made sense. Sabotage the plane. Kill the whistleblower. Blame the crash on the mysterious woman who wasn't supposed to be there. Falcon 2, long disappeared, suddenly reappearing on a doomed flight. It would have worked. 2, if she hadn't heard her call sign. If she hadn't answered it. Reed looked at her. What now? Elena narrowed her eyes. Now we land. This plane. And after that? Her voice was low, certain. Then we expose everything. Elena stood, the weight of the moment settling around her like a storm cloud. The cockpit, usually her sanctuary, now felt like the eye of a hurricane calm, but surrounded by chaos. Captain Reed's face was pale, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and fear. The co-pilot remained unconscious, his breath shallow beneath the oxygen mask. We need to get him help, Reed said, his voice cracking. But the cabin is in turmoil. Elena glanced back toward the cockpit door. She hadn't noticed before, but a flight attendant was stationed just beyond the threshold, blocking passage. You can't go back there, she said, voice firm but unsure. I have to, Elena replied, her tone sharper. The pilot asked for me. The attendant hesitated. Passengers are panicking. There's an emergency declared. Elena took a deep breath. I'm the only one who can fix this. Before the attendant could respond, Reed's voice came. Over the intercom. Clear access to the cockpit for the passenger in row 9. Permission granted. The attendant stepped aside, eyes wide with confusion. Elena slipped past and closed the door behind her. Inside the cockpit. The lights flickered as alarms continued their relentless blaring. The screens displayed a slow but steady drop in fuel. Pressure and navigation systems were still erratic. Someone or something was still attempting to wrest control of the plane. Reed's gaze was haunted. This isn't just a malfunction. It's a hijack attempt, Elena nodded. A digital hijack. She crouched beside the co-pilot's seat, checking his pulse and breathing. He's alive but unconscious, she said softly. We need to stabilize him, but first, the plane. Reed turned toward the main controls. I tried to override the autopilot manually, but the system keeps locking me out. Elena's fingers flew over the secondary control panel. They're hacking the software remotely, using a backdoor. Whoever programmed this knows the military override codes. She paused, eyes narrowing as she traced lines of code cascading across the screen. They're running an override loop, constant injections of commands to disrupt navigation. Reed leaned closer. Can you stop it? I can try, Elena said. But we'll have to cut off external inputs and switch to manual control. The cockpit will be locked down, and no one else can come in. Reed swallowed hard. Are you sure you want to do that? It means the cabin crew won't have access here. Elena met his gaze. It's the only way to regain control. She keyed in a sequence of commands that began shutting down all external communication links. The cockpit door automatically locked with a metallic click dot in the cabin. The crew knocked desperately. Voices muffled. Passengers' murmurs grew louder as fear spread. Elena's hands tightened on the yoke. She felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the same that had propelled her through countless missions. Every fiber in her body was wired for this moment. Reed nodded toward her. Take it. With a deep breath, Elena disengaged autopilot. The plane lurched slightly, responding to manual inputs. Good, she said. Now steady. The digital hijack attempted to fight back, sending false data to the instruments. Elena blocked and countered, overriding the rogue signals one by one. Her mind raced, parsing years of training, memorized protocols, and instinct. She was battling an unseen enemy in the circuitry of the aircraft itself. Hours ago, she had been a silent passenger, lost in a book. Now, she was a pilot again, fighting for every life on board. Reed monitored her work, offering backup whenever possible. Despite his injuries, his trust in her was unwavering, but the threat wasn't done. An explosion rocked the plane. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead. The cabin filled with alarmed screams. The hijack attempt had triggered a partial engine failure. Reed grimaced. Fuel levels dropping faster than predicted. Elena gritted her teeth. We need to land fast. Nearest airport is a military reserve base, 30 miles west, Reed said. Runways short, not designed for commercial jets. Better than crashing, Elena said. She grabbed the radio mic. Flight 4827 to tower, requesting emergency landing at reserve base. Prepare for immediate approach. Static crackled in response. The plane shuddered violently. Elena fought to maintain altitude and speed. She focused on the runway's faint outline, barely visible through thickening clouds. Every moment stretched, tension taut as a wire. The cabin behind them was filled with fear and prayers. Alana's heart hammered. This was more than a flight. This was survival. And the locked cockpit held the last hope. She whispered, Hold on, everyone. We're coming home. Elena gripped the yoke with unyielding focus as the plane trembled around her. Every creak and groan of the fuselage was amplified in the tense silence of the locked cockpit. The engines sputtered warning signals, the fuel gauge dipping dangerously low. She glanced at the altimeter, 18,000 feet and falling. Outside, thick clouds masked the horizon, leaving her with only instruments and instinct. The digital hijack attempt hadn't ended. It was a slow, persistent pulse in the system, trying to regain control. It was unlike any she had encountered before. A malicious code embedded deep in the aircraft's navigation software, precise, adaptive, and insidious. Her mind raced back to her Air Force days. The countless hours spent debugging software glitches and battling enemy cyber attacks during simulations. She had once faced a similar threat, Black Ops hackers, trying to force a drone crash behind enemy lines. The memory stirred something deep inside. She reached into her black case once more and pulled out a small USB drive, the ghost code. It was a digital kill switch she and Reed had developed years ago, designed to sever rogue control in compromised aircraft systems. Classified beyond top secret and only activated in the direst of emergencies. With trembling fingers, she connected it to the plane's auxiliary port. The screen blinked, displaying encrypted warnings. For a heartbeat, the cockpit filled with tension as the ghost code initialized, scanning for the malware source. Then, a breakthrough. Lines of red code began to vanish, replaced by steady green. The digital assault was being isolated and neutralized, system stability increasing. Elena said quietly, relief barely audible. Reed, leaning against the side panel, allowed himself a rare smile. You actually did it. Elena didn't reply. There was no time. The fuel was still bleeding fast, and the clock was ticking. She pulled up the emergency approach maps, eyes darting between runways and wind speeds. Nearest landing strip is a military reserve base 30 miles west. She murmured. Reed nodded. It's small, runway short. Not designed for a commercial jet. Elena exhaled slowly. Better than a crash. She radioed air traffic control. Flight 4827 requesting emergency landing clearance at military reserve base. Estimated. Arrival. 5 minutes. Static answered. In a tense voice. Flight 4827. You are in restricted airspace. Unauthorized landing approved. Proceed with caution. Her fingers tightened around the yoke as the plane began its descent through thick cloud cover. Lightning flashed briefly outside, illuminating the dark outline of the base ahead. The runway was narrow, hemmed in by dense forest. A few floodlights flickered on as the base scrambled emergency responders. The cabin trembled as the aircraft descended, passengers gripping armrests and each other. Screams, sobs, whispered prayers filled the air. Alana's heart pounded, every muscle straining to keep the plane steady. The ground rushed up fast. She aligned the plane's wings with the runway, lowering the landing gear with a mechanical clunk. Sparks flew as the tires met the rough tarmac. The aircraft shuddered violently. As Elena fought to maintain control, Captain Reed's voice cut through the cockpit. You're doing great. Falcon 2. The plane skidded down the runway, smoke billowing from overheated brakes. Elena applied reverse thrust, coaxing the giant metal bird to a halt. Silence. Then, cheers from the cabin and emergency crews swarmed the plane. Elena slumped back, exhaustion washing over her. But before anyone could celebrate, she saw a figure in the distant security personnel moving quickly toward the rear of the plane. Her eyes narrowed. Gregory Salin, the whistleblower, was alive. And now, the real fight was just beginning. The moment the wheels touched down, the cabin exploded into a chaotic mixture of cheers and cries. Passengers clung to each other, eyes wide with disbelief and relief. Some whispered prayers, others sobbed openly. But inside the cockpit, Elena's focus remained razor-sharp. The landing was far from over. Hold steady, she said, voice calm but firm. We're not safe yet. The narrow runway of the military reserve base was unforgiving, too short for a commercial jet, with thick woods on either side. One wrong move could send the plane careening into trees or worse. Reed's face was pale but resolute. You're doing everything right. The engines roared as Elena engaged reverse thrust, slowing the plane's momentum. Sparks flew beneath the fuselage as the wheels scraped against the rough surface. Behind her, the passengers were gripping their armrests, hearts pounding in unison. Elena could almost hear their silent prayers. Suddenly, the plane lurched to the left. Engine 2 is losing power, Reed shouted. Alana's hands tightened on the yoke, compensating. She nudged the controls, correcting the tilt with precision. Years of military flying, emergency drills, and split-second decisions flowed through her veins like electric current. In the cabin, a mother held her child close, whispering soothing words amid the turbulence. The elderly man beside them clenched his jaw, eyes squeezed shut. Outside, the runway lights flickered as emergency crews sprinted to the perimeter. Almost there, Elena muttered, sweat trickling down her temple. As the plane slowed the forward. Momentum threatened to throw it off balance. A nose pitched up slightly. Elena fought the controls, resisting the urge to overcorrect. The tires ground against the tarmac, sparks flying in a dazzling but dangerous display. The plane skidded, smoke billowing from the brakes. Time seemed to stretch. The tension in the cockpit was palpable. Finally, the engines powered down, the plane rolling to a shuddering stop. Elena exhaled, muscles slackening for the first time. An hour's Reed reached over, gripping her shoulder. "You saved us." But Elena's eyes were on the rear cabin door. Security personnel were moving quickly toward. A man in a dark jacket, Gregory Salin, the whistleblower. Elena's mind raced. Salin held secrets powerful enough to topple governments. His presence on the flight was no accident. The hijack attempt, the cyber etiquette, was all connected. A flight attendant approached Elena in the cockpit. "The passengers want to thank you." Elena shook her head. "I didn't do this for thanks." Reed nodded. "You did it for who you are." Outside, cameras began to flash. Reporters shouted questions. But Elena slipped quietly from the plane, her black backpack over one shoulder. She moved swiftly, blending into the crowd of emergency workers. A young woman in row 10, still clutching a small notebook, found a folded piece of paper on her seat. She opened it carefully, written in neat handwriting were the words, "Never forget who you really are." F2 Elena disappeared into the early morning haze. The world would soon know her as the mysterious woman who saved Flight 4827. But to her, she was simply Falcon 2 pilot, survivor, ghost, and this was just the beginning. The crowd outside swelled with reporters and emergency responders, their voices rising in a clamorous mix of excitement and urgency. Cameras flashed and microphones thrust forward, eager to capture the story of the woman who had saved Flight 4827. But Elena Matthews was nowhere to be found. She moved quickly, her black backpack slung over one shoulder, weaving through the chaos. With practiced ease, her hoodie was pulled low over her face, masking the determined expression beneath. Her heart still raced, not from the adrenaline of landing a crippled plane, but from knowing that the mission wasn't over. Behind her, the base was a hive of activity. Emergency crews tended to passengers. The injured were loaded into ambulances, and military personnel secured the perimeter. The whistleblower, Gregory Salin, was taken into protective custody, guarded closely by agents whose faces Elena recognized from old files. She had only minutes. Minutes to vanish again. Minutes to become a ghost once more. At a safe distance from the runway, Elena paused and pulled out the folded paper she had left in the seat pocket. The simple message, "Never forget who you really are." F2 was her farewell, a reminder not just to the passengers, but to herself. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her jacket. The world was clamoring for answers, but Elena had none to give. Not yet. She thought back to the years of silence, years spent running, hiding from a past she had hoped to leave behind. But the past had caught up, and it had brought her back to the sky. She took a deep breath, eyes scanning the horizon. The rising sun painted the clouds gold. A new day dawning. A day full of promise and peril. Elena knew that the digital hijack attempt was only the first move in a larger game. The secrets Gregory Salin held were dangerous, powerful, and people would kill to keep them buried. She had to be ready. She tucked her USB drive, the ghost code, deep into her bag. It was a key that might unlock truth or unleash chaos. Her phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "We saw. We're watching. Stay safe, Falcon 2. She smiled faintly. Somewhere, all eyes still remained, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. As she walked away from the flashing cameras and the shouting crowds, Elena felt the weight of her duel. Life settled over her. Ordinary woman, secret pilot, silent guardian. She disappeared into the mist, Just another shadow among many. No name. No fanfare. Just a whisper in the wind. And the promise that when the world needed her again, Falcon too would return. For now, she was gone. But the sky would never forget her. The end.